Mormon Mental Health podcast is a production of the Open Stories Foundation and relies on donations from its listeners like you. To help keep this podcast alive, please consider becoming a monthly subscriber. Any amount will make a difference. You can click the right-hand donate button on mormonmentalhealth.org. All contributions are tax-deductible within the United States and go towards podcast production and building community support and program development for Mormons on various paths and journeys. Thank you for listening. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Mormon Mental Health. This is Natasha Helfer Parker. Super excited to be with you. Tonight, we're going to be talking with a guest that I've invited on the show about mixed faith family dynamics and relational health in regards to that concern or topic. It doesn't necessarily have to be a concern. It can actually be a wonderful thing. But before we get to going much farther, I just want to give a shout out for the podcast and all of you who are regular donors to Mormon Mental Health Podcast. You help make this project stay alive. It barely stays alive. It ekes through. So it definitely needs your financial support. If you're willing to make a donation, please go to mormonmentalhealth.org. And there's some very easy buttons to be able to give a monthly donation or a one-time donation. Whatever you can offer would be very appreciated because that's what makes this thing roll. As far as upcoming events, just so that you all know, I will be at several things that are coming up. Some of you may have heard about the Thrive Conference. I'll be at that. I'll be at Sunstone. I will be giving a few presentations and even going on a faith transitioning cruise as a guest speaker next summer. So lots of information. All of that can be found at my personal website, natashaparker.org, as well as information on how to get a hold of me or providers if you want to see me or somebody I would recommend professionally. So given all of that, hopefully that's enough information to get us going. But without further ado, I would like to welcome Shandra Harris to the show. Shandra wrote a piece, I think I saw it more, Shandra, on your Facebook page, and then I saw it and I was like, this is definitely something I was interested in. And so then she kind of rewrote it and submitted it to my blog, which is called the Mormon Therapist blog. And it's called President Nelson, I'm Having a Trust Crisis. So we're going to get into what she was talking about there. But before that, she is majoring in clinical mental health as a graduate student. She's going to start her internship here in a few months. She is stationed in San Antonio, Texas with her, I'm assuming, military husband. And I'm going to let her introduce herself a little bit further. So welcome to the show, Shandra.
Thank you, Natasha. I'm happy to be here.
And you said that you are in sacred space right now, right? This is your closet?
This is my sacred ground, my walk-in closet. I talk to my mom on the phone in here. This is my private.
I love it. Sometimes we got to
find You should be honored in my sacred ground.
I am very honored. I am very honored to be there with you.
We had to establish that first.
All right. So this blog post that you wrote was in regards to your reaction to President Nelson's General Conference address, or one of the addresses he gave, particularly on Sunday. It was kind of his main address. So before we go into that, why don't you give us just a history of your background? So how do you come to be a Mormon? How do you consider your relationship with Mormonism to be? And if I understand correctly, it's your husband who's kind of transitioned away from the faith, and you're a believer or active, or however you want, whatever words you want to use. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your family situation?
Sure. So yes, my husband has stepped away from the church, where he has taken his name. He removed his name from the records of the church. And this has been very new, very fast. It happened very quickly within probably a year span. So this is still new for me as well, as we try to navigate what this looks like, mostly for the kids. He grew up way more Orthodox than I did, being raised in a small town in Idaho, where everybody around him was Mormon, his associates, his colleagues, and probably all related as well. I grew up right outside DC my entire life, so a lot more diversity. My parents were converts. My husband is a Harris, so direct line from the Harris, Martin Harris. And so we saw our religions, I think, like we've never been on the same page religious wise. when he was all the way in, and when I say all the way in, we're talking all the way in, I was not Mormon enough for him. So we were constantly kind of at each other's throat, because I've always been in the gray area. Now that he's left, sometimes I'm too Mormon for him. So because I'm still in the gray.
I'm chuckling. I'm kind of loving this, even though I'm sure it's not shown up in your home very wonderfully.
Well,
it's such a good point, right? That even though we're all Mormon, quote unquote, like there's a huge spectrum of what that means, right? And how people show up in their religious cultures and traditions and upbringings.
Absolutely, because we would hear the same thing, and that would look very different for each of us according to what maybe it was modeled in the home, especially. And so really it was in his best interest to leave. There was too many triggers. It just wasn't a healthy upbringing overall, very oppressive. It wasn't used for peace. It was used for coercion. My household, since my parents were converts, they grew up differently, but then they also tried to do it right. So I wouldn't say it was conventional in any way, but kind of learning along the way, kind of like me learning about technology with my teenagers. Today, just I don't have a set way in mind. I'm just kind of doing it along the way. So I think they were kind of just more open and learning and listen. So if I had a problem, say with patriarchy or something, they wouldn't say they had an answer, because they really didn't. This was new for them too. And so they just be like, I don't know, pray about it. And so I was always taught to honor my voice and find my voice, and to find my own answers and to honor my own journey. Whereas my husband, he's, I think his own voice was more not encouraged. And the very first, I guess, law of heaven was obedience. And so you don't even question. So our marriage is actually a lot more healthier now, just because I'm sitting here honoring my voice and now he can honor his. And this is beautiful, instead of playing a role, if you will, or I'm not enough for him. It's just this good enough type of always chasing after the enoughness when he was all in the church. And so now
he had a lot of expectations about your marriage or about you behaviorally, or about how you were supposed to act as a couple or as parents. Is that what you're meaning?
Yes. Well, first it was expectations on himself, when he could, and you can only love someone as much as you love yourself. And so our connection was not very intimate, our emotional intimacy. And that didn't increase until he could be true to his own voice and listen to his own voice. And so this has been a beautiful progression. His relationships with all of his children have improved. He's found peace in his life. He feels good enough as is. And I honor that in him. I have never been upset about his faith transition in his belief changing. We have had run-ins where I've been mad at him on how he's gone about it. Like, I don't agree how you're going about this. That's a lot of turmoil sometimes, because any transition, even if it's good, is going to create havoc. So
right. Well, and there's a lot of markers, I think, in Mormon lifestyle. And by markers, I mean kind of day-to-day activities, from what you drink and eat to, paying tithing, to going to church and having callings, to whether or not the kids are going to go to seminary. I mean, there's a lot of kind of day-to-day decision-making that, unless you're in a mixed faith relationship or have left, you kind of take for granted. You're kind of like, well, this is normal. Mm-hmm. This is kind of how normal life goes.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's interesting is, like, there were some perks when he left, because then, like, for example, I didn't have to drink my coffee in private anymore, because he was always getting after me. But you're right, like, Sundays were hell for a long time, because it was just, you just follow a role. And now we have to pave our own path. And what does that look like? This is our own, and is that the hill we want to die on? And so, but it's been beautiful overall. I think it's been a beautiful opportunity for our children, that they've been taught they can listen to their own inner voice, and mom and dad will support them because we support each other.
So, and you didn't really see this coming. Like you're saying, this happened fairly quickly.
Oh,
this was only about a year ago.
Oh, yeah.
And at first, was it more anxiety producing for you than what you're presenting right now? Or was it fairly comfortable for you from the get-go?
Well, what was interesting is like when he first told me, like my first response was, because he thought the marriage was over, like I'd leave him, because that's how
Mm,
in he was, that if roles were reversed, that's how he would have felt. And
mm,
so, but my first response was, I married you. I didn't marry the church. And I remember going in and starting to get ready for bed. And I thought, well, I have a space like in between the stimulus and the reaction. I have this space of like deciding, what am I going to do with this? Like, how am I going to respond to this? I kind of have a choice. And I thought, well, I literally felt, well, now I actually get to practice what I've been preaching. I get to actually
mm,
practice my belief instead of just say I believe. So what is that? I believe in grace. I believe you can worship to the dictates of your own conscience. I
mm,
believe, and so it's like, oh, now I get to practice what I,
mm.
and so it wasn't a threat until, like he's wanting to tell the kids everything all up at once. And I'm like, I don't agree with how you're dealing with it, so it was mostly the kids. Yeah, I Mama Bear Claws come out like, like a threat. Are you gonna
Sure.
harm them or hurt them? So that's been kind of like, we're trying to do that gradually because we both deserve to parent. We both deserve to allow our children know what we believe. And although I believe in that concept, I also believe on their own time frame and journey too, according to like age appropriateness or, gradually, like, I mean, it was hard for him. Do you really want that for your kids? So it's just kind of
Mhm.
like, let's do this carefully and cautiously and slowly, you know? So
Are you comfortable sharing the age range of your kiddos?
sure. Well, we got the four teenagers, one's off at college now, so 19, 17, 15, 13. And then we've got the bonus baby who's 5 years old right now.
Love that one. That's the baby. I love it. Okay, so yeah, so that's quite a range, and most of those kiddos are fairly old enough to start having deeper conversations, right?
Yep.
Other than the 5-year-old. So have
Yep.
they been, how have they responded, and what's been kind of the general dialogue slash feeling in your home like?
The dialogue has been kind of like, it's changed, it evolves. It's never just, because we're learning along the way. So like it used to be like when he was in his angry phase, because we still wanted to teach our kids, we still wanted to have the family home evening, but that's just going to look different. And we still wanted to have religion, spirituality, but that's going to look different. So it was just kind of like one conversation at a time. So he would maybe have a conversation when it was his turn to teach, and we told each other we would be polite and respectful when it's their turn and we wouldn't disagree. But then after it was over, I'd be like, I disagreed with, and it was more the display of, it was too much too soon, or it was too angry. I'd like you to say what you believe more than what you don't believe. Or, so that's I mean, he's gonna have his own things that bug him of
Mhm.
what I've done. So I can only speak for myself.
Right.
But 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 it was devastating for the kids at first.
Mm,
Absolutely, their world fell apart. They had to decide, what does this mean? Same with me. I would literally was like, what does this mean? And so where I said, well, I guess I get to believe what I get to practice what I believe, they went right to, does this mean we won't be a family forever?
mhm,
And yes, we like to say, well, that's just culture, and oh, you don't worry about it, everything will work out in the end. But that's the members talking. So the first thing I did what I was instructed to do, which is turn to the church, turn to a quote, turn to scriptures, find something that says my family is good. And there's nothing. There are no resources, there are no tools, there are no support groups. There is nothing that says my family's good to go. I found I found degrading quotes, I found pats on the head, I found patronizing talks. I found, don't worry, you'll be given someone, if he's not worthy in the next life. I found you can visit him in other kingdoms. I found just an array of unhelpful dialogue that doesn't support me in my family today. And so my next step was, well, the church has got nothing. I'm going to turn to my own relationship and my own belief system and see what I believe. Because as you know, we're going to have, it had never been challenged until he left. And so now I really had to decide what was worth fighting about. Because I wasn't going to fight about everything. If he was like, oh, the church does this harm. Well, if it did that harm, I'd just rather be like, yeah, it does. That sucks. As opposed to like, that's the hill I want to die on defending the church. I'd rather pick what was dear and precious to me. And those things came on a very personal, sacred level that I don't find in the church. I just don't see a quote that supports what I have received in my own, I don't know, testimony, if you will.
Sure, sure. Are you comfortable sharing maybe just one type of thought process that kind of had you down that type of direction, something that you've kind of reclaimed on your own turf?
Yeah, the whole thing has been a process. So like, I remember one of those moments of an evening where we were fighting again because he was in his anger stage and he was saying all the bad things about the church. And I was defending the church because it was like my default. It was almost like I was feeling threatened somehow. And then I stopped and I was like, why am I defending an institution over people? And I was like, why? And then I thought, truth doesn't need to be defended. If it's true, truth can stand on its own 2 feet. And if he's God, God doesn't need me to defend him. He's God. He can defend himself. I need to do what he's told me to do, not what the church has told me to do. The church told me to defend the institution, which is why I was doing that. God has told me to defend his little ones. He's told me to feed his sheep. He's told me to love one another. He hasn't ever told me to defend him. I can't find that anywhere, in whether personal revelation or really, but the church is so. So I was like that. I remember just that night, just being like, I'm done defending the church. I don't need to. That is not my responsibility. I need to defend my family, and I need to defend feelings. I need to defend relationships. And so that was kind of a turning point for me. And in so doing, I took it to the Lord of, how can I do that? It was almost like I got this answer of, this is what I need to do. And now it was kind of the, okay, well, what does that look like, right? How? And so my answer of how, when I was like, bringing up, like going to bed, I've got garments on, he doesn't, like there's a reason why in the church, when you have like a married couple and they both join and they're both converts and one wants to go to the temple and one doesn't, they will discourage that. And there's a reason why, is because it divides. It's a barrier in the marriage bedroom. It just is. And so in my prayer, it was like, I was told I need to lean in towards my husband, even if that means leaning away from the church, because putting my husband first was putting God first. Like sometimes it's like I have to put God and then my husband. He's like, no, you put people first, and that is putting me first.
Wow.
And so I was like, I'm going to take off my garments so that we don't have this contention at night, and we can put everything on the shelf, our beliefs, our ideals, our narratives, and just be us. Skin to skin contact in bed, and nothing else matters. And when I did that, this might be too much information for your viewers, but when I did
No, it's not. It's I'm super glad that you're comfortable sharing.
well, it's gonna get better. So
this is the kind of stuff we need to be talking about.
Okay. Well, it's gonna get better, because here comes, but I got healthier in my sexuality when I did that, and infections went away, and I got healthier. And so basically I was like, I'm healthier, God. I don't, if this means I have to be unhealthy to follow you, I don't want to follow you anymore. And I was like in tears and I'm bawling, and it was a medical condition. And, it was just like, what if I had more faith, maybe what, and I just went about it around and around. And then finally my answer, and this was a very precious moment, so I'm sharing in sacred ground, but my precious moment came when I was like, I always wanted to follow you. I have all, to my detriment, I've always wanted to follow you. And you could call it what you want, the spirit, your inner voice, your conscience, God. But my head voice was like, Shandra, you have gotten it wrong this whole time. You thought you were following me? This whole time I've been following you. And that just liberated me. It liberated me from putting faith in check boxes, because now it's at the Savior's feet. And he's my judge in Israel. So it's liberated me from the bishop who's been on my case. It's liberated me from voices, because after I put that on my Facebook, the letter to Nelson, I got both voices, supporting and backlash. And I didn't, all those voices just dissipated because it didn't matter. It was just, it wasn't me trying to follow Jesus anymore. Be like Jesus, do better, be more, do more. It was like, Shandra, you thought you were following God? Really? No, I've been following you. I sustain you and support you in whatever you have ever wanted to do. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm doing this. He's like, and then I've got you. Then I support you. So that's been my journey.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing such a beautiful moment. That's your own kind of religious, spiritual journey. And to share that with us, I think is really beautiful. I'm always somewhat cautious when people share things like this, because I'm reminded of the scripture, don't throw your pearls in front of swine. And although I never really liked that scripture, I also get it. I think sometimes when we go about something a certain way that maybe somebody else would go differently, it can be, put down or laughed at or not understood or taken out of context. And so I just really, really appreciate your vulnerability. Alan Mount says, all about the people. Love that, Shandra. So if you're listening, please feel free to ask questions or make comments along the way. What's helped you if you're in a mixed faith relationship or mixed faith family situation? It's really saddening to me to hear you say, obviously that when this situation came up and you went to the church for resources, that really there was nothing there. And I agree with you. There is nothing there for mixed faith families, which of course then gets us to why I had quite the reaction myself to President Nelson's talk, because I'm listening usually to General Conference through the lens of trying to hear what, if any, resources are coming our way that I can use with a primarily, Mormon clientele that I see professionally, and or things that I need to be aware of that have been said, because I know that people are going to be coming into my office upset about certain things. So in a time when we are really having many, many members of our faith shift in their beliefs, whether it's shift in their belief of orthodoxy or shift altogether and transition away and leave our church, such as your husband has, it is very disheartening and disappointing to me when we can't have more resources for families like yours, where you're trying to make it work. I think it's horrific to imply that divorce is the answer, or that families should split up because of religious beliefs. And yet oftentimes, like you're mentioning, people kind of either get that kind of indirect message or unintended pressure because, if you can't do it this one way, how are you going to do it? What is that going to mean? So can you sit and explain to us for a minute what it was like, just kind of, paint the picture of what General Conference was like in your home, and what ended up happening as your family in particular was watching General Conference?
Okay, so the place that we were in watching General Conference, my husband, the previous General Conference wasn't there at all. It was too triggering, and he's trying slowly to be like, trying to support me more. He's felt very supported from on my end. He's told me that, and so now he's like, how can I support you when I just am so triggered by this? Because I think it's easier for me to attend his church, where I can add to my beliefs, where he comes to my church and it's just so, he has like a visceral response. And so I didn't want him to do that, but he's so trying, and just that loyalty and intention of trying showed so much love to me. And so this General Conference, I felt like it was so special to me that he was just home and he wasn't sitting down or anything. But the first talk that he sits down next to me was Nelson's talk, because that's the time when normally when prophets talk, it's not really anything. It might be some news or policy change, or, it's not really like a talk. And that's also the time where we tell the kids to knock it off and listen, because they're usually flumbling around. Stop it, prophet's speaking.
Right. This is the one talk that we're going to pay attention to.
Shut up. Pay attention to so that you remember one thing about conference and not cinnamon rolls.
Right.
So he sits down next to me and we're just sitting snuggling there. And I'm like, oh, we're progressing. This is great. The children can see that even though we disagree, we support each other. I sit next to him at church. He sits next to me during a general conference. This is beautiful. And then he goes up there and completely is out of line, crosses boundaries. And when you cross boundaries, that it just is disrespect. There's no way to respectfully cross boundaries. And so he crossed the boundaries and it became completely disrespectful, out of line. He threw my husband in the line of fire. And I'm sitting there just looking at all of my children, and they're looking at the screen, to me, to dad, to the screen, and wondering what's going on. And it was almost like a deer in the headlights, like a train wreck where like it's so bad, but you can't look away because you're waiting for it to get better, maybe like a horror film or something. Like I need closure, let me wait for it to get better. And then it closed. And we just sat there dumbfounded, like you're just sitting there staring. And I remember a song came on from the choir, and then Oaks was going to speak after that. And I thought, well, I don't want to listen to Oaks anyway, so we're just going to turn it off after the song while Oaks is talking. And all of my kids were just like, my boys, they don't like showing emotion or vulnerable emotion anyway. And so they start poking and punching one another and doing bathroom jokes, and and then my daughter's like, Mom, and so I was like, that's it, stop, everybody just stop. They turned off the television, and and Jason was just sitting there shaking his head like, and it's so shocking to me because me and Jason are always having these conversations where he's saying, the church says this, hun. And I'm always going, no. And then the church proves he's right. And I hate it when they prove he's right because he's making me look bad. The church is constantly making me look bad because I'm like, no, we don't do that. So we go do it. And so he's just in his head like, yeah, this is what it is. And so I turned it off. And I said, come here, everybody, just come here. And we knelt on the floor. I held hands with everybody. And I said, this is a lot to take in, but everybody's voice is valuable right now. And I need you to we need to give each other space and just say whatever's on your mind, whatever it is, good, bad. It could be about the talk. It doesn't have to be about the talk, whatever it is. And so I went first and I offered a prayer, and it was kind of and I was respectful of Jason. I was like, dear God, if you're there, as opposed to like the conventional way that we pray. If you are, we're hurting right now, and is this true? And what do we do with this? And there's, my girls are just sobbing, and then my turn was over, and then it was the boys' turn, and they did some bathroom humor, lest you guys think my family's perfect, sitting on the ground in a circle, holding hands, they're kicking and whatever. And then it was Emma's turn, and she couldn't even talk. This is my daughter that I wrote about in the blog, that ended up going to her room and couldn't come out for 3 days after this talk. But she just pushed play on her phone, the song, Lilies of the Field, because this is the Jesus we've taught her about that is getting harder to find in my church. And so she just pushed play, and we just sat there listening to Remember the Lilies of the Field. And after that was over, she went upstairs and didn't come down again for 3 days. So I think that when I have people throwing crap at me, I'm okay. But when they go after my daughter, then I had to say something. So that was my letter to him about how harmful he's being to children, divorced families, single family. I mean, the majority of families was just cruel. It was just cruel. I don't believe in dysfunctional, broken families. Families are sacred and complete in their own unique circumstances. That's it. We don't have an idealistic family. It doesn't exist. And he even used his family as an example of one. It was wrong on every level.
Thank you, Shandra. I can feel your emotion very strongly, and I have very similar sentiments. I totally can empathize with this idea that, when they go after our kids, it's when enough is enough. And I think that, I'm not sure if it was you who said this or somebody else, but in essence, when we do General Conference these days, most of us are watching General Conference from the comfort of our own homes, because now they can stream it right into our computers or TVs. So very few people actually go to church anymore for General Conference. And somebody had made the comment of, basically, I invited you into my home. And I'm not sure if this was you, but I invited you into my home. And then this is what you ended up saying to my children about either me or their father or their mother, right? Or their aunt or their grandparent or their sibling. And how dare you come into my home as a guest and, say these kinds of things about how only certain types of families or certain types of obedient people will, make it to the end, type of thing. Now, the pushback, obviously, from a lot of people as well, this is the doctrine. This is the doctrine. So why are you all so upset if this is the doctrine? And there is scriptural precedence, right, in the Doctrine and Covenants for a lot of what he shared. Do you want to address that, or do we want to just leave that be?
I think that it's unfortunate because, putting aside Joseph Smith's wrongdoings and just focusing on his restorative church, I feel like that wasn't the essence of what Mormonism was supposed to be. I actually saw his viewpoints as very, very progressive for his time, radical acceptance for his time. It was blasphemous to be even talking about women speaking in church and a female deity, and children don't just die and go to hell. And people felt that resonated with people. How many people in the congregations who sit there and had a baby die or their spouse die and they're like, oh, they weren't baptized, they're in hell right now. And they're sitting in their congregations in pain. And I relate to those pioneers because I sit in my congregation now in pain when I hear things like that. And so if I heard some kind of progressive movement of like a new church and be like, hey, no, family units are in heaven and you guys are good to go, I'd probably up and join them too. I'd be the pioneer, right? And so I kind of feel like it's been corrupted from what it was intended to be. And because we didn't, in all the other Christian sects, we didn't have family units. It was the hellfire damnation speeches. And he challenged the narrative. He challenged the status quo. And he's like, this doesn't sit well with me. And lots of people felt the same way. And they and so I don't feel like it's the Mormonism I know. And Jason, my husband, he'd be like, yeah, because you always lived religion according to Shandra. And I'm like, no, that's Mormonism.
Well, and I agree at some level, it is Mormonism according to whomever, right? Because there's contradictory stuff all over the scriptures. And what I find interesting is that you can find the quote unquote doctrine that he's speaking of in three scriptures in the Doctrine and Covenants. That's the only place you can find it written in the way it's written. That's kind of rigid. And yet there's lots of other scriptures that speak really very much against rigidity and talk about love and not being judgmental. And even when he said something along the lines of, oh, I'm glad that I'm not in a position to judge this person that he was putting down, to the point that people were laughing about a person that he was speaking about. I was just in shock that I was watching my own prophet putting down another person, and everybody's laughing like it's no big deal to basically make fun of a person who isn't ready to commit to the type of things that many Mormons don't think twice about. And I just it's hard for me to understand why certain, we pick at certain things. I know a lot of people don't like the idea of cafeteria Mormonism, and then I don't know how else. I mean, everybody has to be at some point. You can't. There's too many principles that are wrestle with one another to not be a cafeteria Mormons. I like Chandra's Mormonism. I like Natasha's Mormonism.
Yes.
I just really did not like President Nelson's Mormonism a
No.
few Sundays ago.
Claim your spiritual authority and live your truth. I feel like that's Mormonism, but it's, and God, and obviously Nelson has a different God than me, but he is the same and he hears both of us and he sustains us where we're at. The difference is I'm not going to tell Nelson he's not good enough or put down his family, and I will respect him where he's at the same way I would expect him to do for me and all of us.
Can you talk a little bit more about what ended up happening with your daughter or with your kiddos post that day? Because it sounds like it really hit hard.
Yes. So she's been in and out of counseling from the time prepubescent adolescent stage. And so there's little like triggers that might set it off, transitions or moves or depression or like a Nelson talk. And so she was in a very good place. She was healing, recovering, and then she went up to her room and she was just beside herself and just crying and crying. And she kept telling me her prayers weren't getting answered. She keeps praying because it was almost like he put us in a position of having to choose, like this black and white binary thinking, like choose us or your family. It was like and he put me in that position too, because I either had to say, kids, don't listen to him, or I had to say, well, yeah, that's the truth, honey. It's your fault we can't be together as a family. So he made me have to choose. I don't want to have to choose. I want to tell my children you can find peace in the prophet's words. But he did it, and he put me in a position to have to choose, and I chose. And I said, kids, don't listen to that. Do not listen to the prophet, which devastated me. I don't want to have to tell my kids don't listen to the prophet, but he put me in a position to have to say so. And so my daughter, who's saying, I'm not getting an answer to prayer, of basically she's trying to make the decision, who's right, or which one where's my loyalties? Is it dad's fault or is the prophet wrong? And I said, Emma, and I was like, the whole prayer thing, Emma, prayer is just tapping into your heart. Prayer is just hearing your own voice magnified and solidified and feeling grounded in that. And prayer is just a metaphor, and people can do that in lots of different ways. People can do yoga and meditate and hiking in nature and, bubble baths, or the conventional way that we've been taught to pray. Like there's Heavenly Mother, pray to, anything. And I was like, what about your poetry, Emma? You used to love writing poetry. Maybe that's your prayer. And so she was like, yeah, and so I left her and she wrote a whole book of poetry. And one of my favorites was her talking about the waves, where she felt like she was in the ocean. And honestly, through my eyes, I heard the cycle of abuse, but I didn't tell her that. But she's talking about the waves that come where everything is good, and then a wave knocks her over. And then she's good again, and then another wave comes and knocks her over. And she just can't she keeps on trying to get up for a breath. And then finally, and I'm just paraphrasing her poem because she could say it says it much more beautiful than I am. But basically, she realized, what, I'm going to trust in the waves instead of fight them now. And so she trusted, and it took her down, and it took her down beneath the sea level. And she said, I saw a whole new world that opened up that was beautiful in its own way and different. And I was thriving down there too. And I can have both worlds. This is not an either or thing, and that there's beauty everywhere. And there's not us versus them, evil versus good. You can find beauty everywhere. God is everywhere. And I got her a little necklace with like a little wave. And for like the next week, she's carrying around her poetry book everywhere. And she got out of bed and she went to school with that poetry book on her hip. But that was her prayer. That was her seeking her inner voice and feeling sure and confident in that. And I think for any parent out there, I think that's what we want for all our children, is just to be able for them to hear their inner voice and be true to themselves and belong to themselves first before they belong to a church or belong to anyone else, but to belong to themselves first. And so And so that was a beautiful healing moment for her. And she describes that as like a second baptism, going under the waves.
Wow. Wow, that's beautiful. And she has submitted that poem to me, and I'm going to be posting it on my blog here shortly, probably this very week. So I'll make sure and link to that when we post this whole podcast on the Mormon Mental Health website. It was very beautifully done. What a wonderful way to have her tap into, what I think is a very Mormon principle, which is that idea of like, personal revelation, right? Personal relationship with deity. And I think sometimes we forget some of our own roots, like you're saying, as far as where we come from. And I do think it's upsetting, especially for kids who are struggling to know how to deal with authority anyway. I mean, that's kind of the teenage developmental cycle, right? Is how much do I have to respect authority? What if I don't agree with authority? Where do I start standing up for my own ideas and beliefs? And so it's hitting them developmentally as well. And we don't have a lot of good role modeling in our leadership and in our church to, be able to say, I made a mistake, or I could have said that differently, or people don't always, I mean, we have it here and there, like you'll hear little talks here and there where sometimes the leaders are talking as the seers, prophets, and revelators, and sometimes they're talking from their own, bias and their own individual space. But we only talk about it when it's like way in the past. I guess when Brigham Young said this, he was probably not talking as a seer and revelator, when he said all his racist crap, for example, right, or whatever. But we're not very good at role modeling that in the present moment. And I think that's very confusing to kids, like your teenagers.
Yeah, we definitely don't model two things. Number one, apologies, because the church does not apologize, which is something that I tell my children, whether it was intentional or not, if you harm somebody, you apologize. I don't care if your intentions were pure, you still apologize. Harm can still be done with good intentions. And second of all, what we don't model is empathy. We don't try to take upon, or the leaders, and model someone else's perspective. Because what's right comes first. What's right comes before a human being and the person, and I guess validating their perspective as their truth. And so yeah, we could definitely do a better job of modeling. And I think both of those have to do with healthy relationships, apologizing and empathy. And that's human connection.
Well, and I think you as a Mormon mother are role modeling also to your daughter by giving her permission. A lot of times Mormon parents are uncomfortable giving permission for a disagreement with a leader or things like that. So you're role modeling this idea that, you're probably going to be disappointed by your elders. You're probably going to be disappointed by your authority figures. The people who are above you, your mentors, your parents, your leaders, your teachers, your loved ones, people who maybe do have very good intentions for you, will let you down. And that's true for all of us, right? And the sooner you learn that and have resiliency to deal with that, I think the better off you are. So I think that you've done a beautiful job in offering that role model for your daughter.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. You want to talk a little bit about your husband's response to that talk? I mean, here he is trying to support you, trying to come into a space that he really doesn't want to even be in, but he's sitting there by his believing wife, right, as the transitioner, and like, okay, I can do this. I'm sure he's deep breathing. I have all kinds of little strategies the transitioner can do. It's like pretend you've got a like translation machine, or pretend you're an anthropologist, or like.
Yeah, he was silent the entire time. I took the reins and was the presider, if you will, in that moment. And the rest of the day he was silent. But he says later to me how much that meant to me, because he told me how much that meant to him. Because I was defending him, I was defending our family. And he felt safe. He felt validated. It was like, it wasn't just anything they say goes because they said it, because of who it comes from. And we need to think with our own brains here too. We're given agency. It's a beautiful gift. We should use that and discern for ourselves. So, and claim our own spiritual authority too. So he said he was very, very grateful for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that was a super bonding moment. I've written a little book called One Family, Two Views. I don't think you've read it, but you must have gotten a lot of my vibes indirectly because this is one of the things that I talk about as far as how to have a strong mixed faith marriage is the person who has privilege needs to stick up for the other person. So you have privilege in church settings as the believer, right? Or you have privilege in this general conference setting. What if he was, I don't know, what if he was with extended family who were also non-believers and we're putting you down, right? As far as like, oh, she's so naive or she's so ridiculously dumb that she would stay with something like that, right? So then that would be his job to stick up for you. And so that you really did that. You followed that principle that I think is so important of making sure you've got your partner's back in the space where you have privilege. Because it would have been very different for your kids and for him if he would have had to be the one to say, wait a minute, I'm being damaged. You came up and you said, no, this is damaging him. And that's not okay. And that was really powerful.
Thank you. I had not even thought of it that way before. In fact, I almost wondered if that was, I wondered, how like when you have a common enemy, you get closer. And I didn't want to like, and so we were coming closer and I was like, I don't want to just become closer because you have a common enemy. So I kind of wrestled with like, but you put it in such beautiful, you articulated that where I had privilege and I did right in that. So thank you for putting in different words than just, oh, we're closer because I have a common enemy, kind of primitive level. But you're right. That was a much better way of phrasing it.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love all the things that you're even role modeling along the way. You mentioned like taking off your garments at night with your husband because he doesn't wear his garments. And hello, everybody. Welcome back to Mormon Mental Health Podcast. For those of you who joined us last night, this is the continuation of my interview with Shandra. And we are going to just kind of try to pick up where we left off because my internet was having a crisis all on its own. So anyway, we were talking with Shandra Harris about her mixed faith relationship, marriage, and impacts in particular of President Nelson's talk given at General Conference that was particularly harmful for her family. And if you want to tune into all that, you can catch last night's podcast and we'll just going to try to continue from here. So where I was going last night, right where it ended, Shandra, although you might be glad that it ended when it did. I was going to revisit something that you had mentioned earlier on in the interview, which was, I thought, something really tender for you to share, which is this idea that as a believing spouse, you were willing to take off your garments at night to be able to sleep with your spouse who, that was kind of an issue, I'm guessing, for him, or it felt like it was an issue that was coming in between you. And one of the things that I thought was just lovely about many of the things that you mentioned yesterday was these concessions, that you're both making, that he's making concessions to make room for your faith and your belief and and respecting your spiritual journey, and that you're making concessions to respect his lack of belief per se, or shifts in belief and comfort levels. And it just reminded me too, just as you said that, and especially since I'm a sex therapist, that I think unfortunately sometimes we see sex as just like the penetrative acts, between a vagina and a penis, versus seeing the cuddling and the skin on skin contact that you had mentioned, and the intimacy of just massage and just being together and sleeping together as part of our sexuality. And so I just thought that was a nice way, especially with our audience, to be able to talk about how it doesn't necessarily, you can still respect the garment and still respect your beliefs and still respect your relationship and your intimacy, which is a lot of what you've been talking about, is how to do both. So any thoughts on that you want to expound on? It was just something I wanted to expound on, really.
Yeah, I like that. I would prefer for us to have an and narrative instead of an either or. And that just makes a much healthier relationship and gives space for both parties, like you said.
Yeah, I really liked that. I thought, I'm guessing you don't have your piece in front of you, do you? The piece that you wrote for me?
I can go grab it. It's right there.
Okay, go get it really fast, because I'd rather hear it in your voice than on mine. And I'll make sure that we're sharing on Facebook too.
Yeah, I thought since we were talking about it, I should print it up.
So I would love to have you read, you did a really good job about kind of coming up with a different option that he could have stated that would have been much more inclusive and things that would have helped a family like yours. So I just thought, would you be willing to read that part of it? Or maybe even like the paragraph before it, just to kind of lead up to it.
So I felt like he had, in our last podcast, Natasha, you said that he isolated like 3 verses and made an entire talk on it. And I said, you forgot to flip the page over and talk on the other side of justice, which is grace. And so I said, I will sustain you and finish your talk for you.
I love that.
So he said, my dear brothers and sisters, according to the said justice, only 0.06% of the world's families are going to make it. That's a very small heaven. Decrease that number with the non and inactive members and add all the families that were ever before the restoration, and the number continues to rapidly decrease to almost nothing. Seeking for our family members and living under meager roofs would be the end of the story if it wasn't for Jesus Christ. But that is not the rock the church stands on. Generations ago, the majority of religions taught death do you part, and there was no family units in heaven, and Joseph Smith questioned this long-standing tradition in the restoration began. The belief that we will be divided in the afterlife is the attack on families. The adversary may get you to believe putting in the work and effort with difficult family members isn't worth it. He wants you to believe it's your checkboxes and individual strength that will bring you back to God, even if it's at the cost of leaving beloved family members behind. This prideful belief results in a sad heaven, which contradicts the greatest commandment of love. Charity member never faileth. All families are imperfect, but that's what makes them complete and sacred. We believe in families of all kinds, shapes, and sizes because the greatest lessons we can learn in life is within families. Defend your family when the adversary tells you your relationships are substandard. Choose people over dogma, ideas, and different opinions. Put your focus on making your home a heaven here on earth. For that same society which exists among us here will exist among us there. Only it will be coupled with eternal glory. Do you want me to keep going?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
My dear brothers.
Great.
Okay. My dear brothers and sisters, the one who's risen on the 3rd day has already made things whole and complete. He's taken upon himself all that's confusing and unsure. Weaponizing religious beliefs to divide and contend with family members would just bring to pass harmful consequences religion is trying to avoid in the first place. Meet your family members where they're at, the same way Jesus meets us where we are at. This is what he meant by come follow me. Let us not create limits on Jesus Christ's mercy, grace, love, and power this Easter season. May we listen to his come follow me invitation by reflecting upon Christ-like characteristics, as perfect love casteth out all fear. This is why the gospel is defined as good news. This is the season of hope and gives us all reason to rejoice. And then I closed his talk.
Yeah, I really, really loved so many parts of that. And the part that probably stood out to me the most is the attack on families. We talk a lot in religious settings about the attack on families. Mm-hmm. And yet oftentimes it is in religious settings that people have told me they feel most attacked by their family members or people that they thought cared about them. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of a general critique of religion in general. It's something we hear a lot of people talking about, that religion is letting them down on. And also this idea that you said the adversary may get you to believe that putting in the work and effort with difficult family members isn't worth it. Can you talk a little bit about what it might be like for people who think, well, if we're not going to be together in the celestial kingdom, then yeah, how might that impact how we treat each other in the here and now?
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing is no one really knows what it is like in the afterlife. As much as we'd like to pretend or claim that we know, we don't. And so wouldn't it be better, instead of having a fear-based narrative with threats, to be focusing, enriching our energy and our love and our focus on our relationships for here and now? Because we know, like at least in Mormonism, whatever relationships you have now is not just going to dissipate in the afterlife. You'll still have them. So it doesn't make any sense to do nothing today because the afterlife will be better. But how is like that doesn't make any sense to me. So I just think that if we can center our energies around our relationships and our efforts and our moments in this life, how much more fulfilling and enriching would even religion be, or our families be?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that whole idea that I think it's somewhat narcissistic to believe we think we know more than we
Mhm.
do. And the eternity is our grand scope that is hard to even wrap our mortal minds around, if the
Mhm.
eternities exist. And so I think why assume anything,
Mhm.
especially when we're given very clear directives, not just one scripture, but I mean, how many scriptures are there that say, do not fear? Or how many
Mhm.
scriptures are there that say, the judgment is not up to you? And
Mhm.
let's not make assumptions about things that we really know very little about. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, so I really like that because I think I've seen people, well, you mentioned it, I mean, you could have, for example, divorced your spouse because of something like this, right? So that's making a decision now because of something that you're assuming you know about in the future.
Mhm.
Or
Mhm.
people might be like, well, if they're not going to make it, then why am I going to spend the time and energy to build up our relationships here? And how devastating that can be to come at family relationships from that perspective.
Mhm.
You kind of closed the talk with, you said, President Nelson, my own relationship with God is stronger than it has ever been before, as I've been practicing what unconditional love looks like in my mixed faith marriage, which has been a big message throughout your whole talk. And your talk yesterday is your own faith journey and your own kind of coming into your own space of testimony and worship through this experience of being in a mixed faith relationship. And you say, I am in no way having a faith crisis, but I can say for certain that I am having a trust crisis when truth and personal revelation continually contradict the mouthpiece of God, which is what he's representing, as he's supposed to be speaking for God. Do you want to talk a little bit about, I mean, there are ecclesiastical leaders that listen to these podcasts at times. Can you talk a little bit about what it takes to trust somebody in that type of authority and what you're needing in order to be able to trust?
I think that we just give people trust until they give us reason not to trust them. And so just kind of like my daughter standing in the waves, I just keep getting knocked over again and again, where I'll feel like, okay, now I can do this, and then something else hits. And especially with all of the changes in policy, it's been interesting because I don't know if we realized how much harm those past policies did until they changed them. And now all of a sudden it's like sitting with that and almost feeling like, well, now I'm kind of mad about it because I don't have to, hunker down and protect myself from it anymore. And I think that, anytime I say something that bothers me or it made me angry or whatever, I'll get a few responses. Number one, I'll get, it's not doctrine, it's just policy. Another one is leaders are not perfect. And that's not what I'm struggling with, because I know leaders are not perfect. I don't expect them to be perfect. What bothers me is that they're always right. And so how do I trust someone who can't even admit when they're wrong, when they've been flat out wrong, and there's no transparency. So then there's no honesty. So then you can't have trust without honesty. And we're just, the newly released Saints book of rewriting our history on LDS.org says this provides an honest look at early church history, like a new history we've never seen before. So, the word new history is kind of an oxymoron, but to just say it for what it is, that this history is new, let's talk about that, instead of just pretending and gaslighting and shoving it under the rug and we don't apologize. I can't trust someone like that. I wouldn't trust a normal human being in my own family life. I would have to have some very safe boundaries around this person. So it's the same in a general authority leadership position. When the mantle is stronger than it and then just my own sense of right and wrong, it's stronger than the debate's over. I wouldn't have that kind of person in my life anyway. So yeah, there's been a lot of trust issues. There's a quote from C.S. Lewis that says, I just want to echo, it says, "Not that I think, in much danger of ceasing to believe in God. The real danger is coming to believe such dreadful things about him." And so it's just, I've lost trust. I have. And I wouldn't say that that's all bad, because I've gained back my own spiritual authority in that process.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Andrew Fegan, who's joining us, says that's the travesty of obsessing about a future qualitative state of existence. The present tense experience is blunted by a near anxiety, a works-based effort to guarantee something for which there is zero proof. The present is reason enough to focus in this moment. So he's talking about some of the things that we were talking about before.
Agreed.
And you are, you're speaking with a lot of spiritual and individual authority. I love seeing that in you. And you are trying to make our church work.
Mm-hmm.
So
trying really, really hard. I've tried so hard in my life. One of the things in that same talk is to study more and do more, if you don't have this strong testimony of the church. And I'm like, telling my husband, I'm looking at him like, please don't study more, we have to bring the Book of Mormon on our cruise, please don't, because it's really not helpful. But it's sad that instead of them asking us and then hearing our story and hearing the narrative, they just make assumptions and then almost do a smear campaign of telling everyone, what doubters are doing before they even hear what we're doing. We're doing more work than we ever have been. And that's, again, there's my trust again.
Right. Right. Well, so give me a sense of, as we close up for today, give me a sense of how Chandra's kiddos and your family entity, how are you Mormoning? How are you doing the Mormon thing?
With all of our kids and the whole family?
Yeah, like how, especially from your perspective, right? So like you're claiming your Mormonism. You're saying, I am Mormon. I'm a believer. I've figured out some things on my own spiritual authority. What does that look like? How do you Mormon, Shandra?
That's a big question. Well, we attend the LDS Church every other week, and we go to the Universal Unitarian Church the other weeks. Sometimes we have a Sabbath day healing, where we just take off, the organized religions altogether, and we go about doing good on the Sabbath, which is what Jesus did, is what we see. And so we do service projects. And he got in trouble for healing on the Sabbath, and we have too, in terms of threats over my daughter's head of pulling her endorsement to go to BYU because she's not in church enough. And and this is my struggle, is I'm trying to Mormon the way that I know how, and I'm getting in trouble for it, like getting called into the principal's office or something. And that's very discouraging to me, because especially where we have a home-centered church, a home-centered, right, family-centered, church supported. And so I feel like if I get called in, I should hear, what can we do for you? What can the church do for your family to support you? Instead of feeling like you're getting in trouble and threats over my daughter's head of pulling endorsements, like with what we should do for the church. And so, yeah, I have loved our Sabbath day healing. We've had some beautiful family opportunities, the Ronald McDonald House, or suicide walks, or homeless, or, and kitchens. It's been beautiful, and we've made beautiful family memories. And so I think their biggest thing is, instead of trying to find sameness or unity in religion. We're trying to find it in family values. And we have way more in common than differences in that. So we're building upon our family values and what is important to us and what we want to teach our kids more than organized religion. And that's how I'm Mormon.
I love it. I love it. And I would hope, that people would be willing to share this episode in particular with your bishops or stake presidents or leaders in your church or family members that might benefit, because I think that, as we are losing people to religion all over the world and every religious culture, I would be very interested in finding ways that we can reinvent ourselves so that we can still stay a force of community, a force of goodness, which we have so much of, right? I think the Mormon community has so many strengths, so many beautiful aspects to it. And I really believe that the only way to really do that sustainably in the long run, especially with millennials and information age and so many things that are shifting so dramatically, is going to be to have more tolerance or more acceptance or different ways to Mormon.
Yes. So that we redefine unity in the body of Christ, not meaning sameness, but to accept and embrace diversity really creates unity.
Yeah, agreed. And that's, in a sense, it kind of goes along with what I feel are gospel principles. And it also goes along with what I feel are social science and relational principles about differentiation skills, emotional intelligence, problem solving, conflict resolution, healing, apologies, trust. I mean, you mentioned so many things, right? So I would hope that we can make room for that. I love hearing of families like yours that are still in and making it work in one way or another. I know that there's many of us out there that are in one way, shape, or form or another that don't necessarily fit the mold. And I would hope that over time we can become the majority voice instead of the only the rigid, kind of more structured, obedience focused, fear-based voice being the one that's allowed, which I think is what's kind of happening right now. I think that's the cultural shift we're in for some reason. Thank you so much for your time. Do you have any closing thoughts or anything I didn't ask you about that you were hoping I would, or anything?
Nope. I've really appreciated you just giving me a chance for myself to hear my voice, and that gives, I just think, a chance to heal, and I really, really appreciated it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with me and your daughter and all of those things. Like I said, I'll be putting her poetry up this week, and we'll make sure to link to all of that so whoever's listening can understand on the website, so you can know where her article is and the poetry and all of that. So thank you, Shandra, so much for your time.
Thank you, Natasha.
Yeah, and for those of you who find this useful, please remember to make a donation. We need your financial support to keep this podcast viable. You can do that at mormonmentalhealth.org. Super easy to donate monthly or one-time donation, whatever it is that you feel you can offer. Other ways that you can support the podcast are to give us a rating on Facebook or iTunes, give me positive feedback, comment on these threads or on the website comment page, interact with us, let me know what you like, what topics you'd want me to cover, etc. So lots of things that we can do better, but I can only do it with your support. So everybody, I hope you have a great day, and we will see you next time. Take care. Thanks for joining us today on Mormon Mental Health Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please help us and become a monthly subscriber at mormonmentalhealth.org. The goals of this podcast include education, advocacy, and the mental health and general well-being of Mormons and their families. We can't further this work without your support. Music for this episode was provided by the Lower Lights.
Over life's tempestuous sea, chart and compass came from thee. Jesus, Savior, pilot me, unknown ways and treacherous shore. Chart and compass came from thee. Jesus, Savior, pilot me.
As a mother stills her child, thou canst hush the ocean wild, wondrous sovereign of the sea. Jesus, Savior, pilot me.
Boisterous wave,
Boisterous wave,
obey thy will.
obey thy will.
When thou sayest
When thou sayest
to them,
be still.
wondrous sovereign of the sea. Jesus, Savior, pilot me. When at last I near the shore, and the fearful breakers roar, may I hear thee say to me, fear not, I will pilot thee. Twixt me and
Twixt me and
the peaceful rest,
the peaceful rest.
then while leaning on my breast, may I hear thee say to me, fear not, I